She was only 7 years old when she first realized something was different about her. It happened during a spelling test. The teacher had asked the class to write 10 simple words. Words like house and table and water. Words that every other kid in the room seemed to know without thinking, but when she looked down at her paper, the letters wouldn't stay still. They moved around, switched places, played tricks on her eyes. She wrote what she thought was right. She tried her best. When the tests came back the next day, hers had a big red number at the top. The girl sitting next to her leaned over and whispered, "How did you get so many wrong?" Those were easy. She didn't have an answer. She just folded the paper in half and shoved it deep into her backpack, hoping no one else would see. That night at dinner, her mother asked about school. Her mother was a busy woman, a doctor who spent long hours at the hospital saving lives. She wore her success like armor. Everything about her was sharp and precise, from the way she spoke to the way she expected the world to work. "Fine," the girl said quietly, pushing peas around her plate. "Just fine? Did anything happen today?" She thought about the spelling test. She thought about the whispered words from her classmate. She thought about how stupid she had felt sitting there, staring at letters that refused to make sense. "Nothing happened," she said. "It was just a normal day." Her mother studied her for a moment, then went back to eating. The conversation moved on to other things. Hospital politics. A difficult surgery. The girl listened without really hearing, grateful that no one had asked to see her backpack. But tests kept coming. And so did the bad grades. By the time she was 9, her mother had stopped asking how school was going. She already knew the answer. Report cards arrived like small disasters, each one confirming what everyone seemed to believe. This child was not smart. This child was not trying hard enough. This child was a problem that needed to be fixed. Her mother hired tutors, expensive ones with fancy degrees and promises of results. They would come to the house 3 times a week, sitting across from her at the kitchen table with flashcards and workbooks and endless patience that always eventually ran out. "Sound it out," they would say. "Just focus. You're not concentrating." But she was concentrating. She was focusing so hard her head would ache. The letters still danced. The numbers still scrambled themselves into nonsense. No matter how many hours she spent at that kitchen table, nothing changed. One by one, the tutors gave up. They would have quiet conversations with her mother in the hallway, using words like unusual and challenging, and perhaps she needs a different approach. Then they would leave and never come back. Her mother's disappointment grew heavier with each failed attempt. It filled the house like smoke, getting into everything, making it hard to breathe. "I don't understand," her mother said one evening, more to herself than to anyone else. "I was reading chapter books by your age. Your grandfather was an engineer. There's no reason you should be struggling like this." The girl sat on the stairs, listening. She had gotten good at being invisible, at making herself small and quiet so she wouldn't add to her mother's stress. But sometimes she couldn't help overhearing things. Things that made her chest tight and her eyes sting. "Maybe she's just lazy," her mother continued, talking on the phone to someone. "A friend. Maybe. Or a colleague. Maybe she doesn't want to succeed. I've given her every opportunity, every resource, and she just sits there, like she's not even trying." The girl crept back to her room and closed the door without making a sound. She lay on her bed and stared at the ceiling, wondering if her mother was right. Maybe she was lazy. Maybe she wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe there was something broken inside her that no tutor or flashcard could ever fix. She started to believe it. How could she not? Everyone around her seemed so certain. The kids at school had figured out that she was different. They weren't always cruel about it, but they weren't kind either. They just sort of... When it was time to pick partners for projects, she was always chosen last. When groups formed at lunch, There was never quite enough room at the table for her. She learned to eat alone. She learned to walk through hallways with her eyes down. She learned that expecting things to get better only made it hurt more when they didn't. At home, the silence between her and her mother grew wider every day. Her mother would come home exhausted from the hospital, pour herself a glass of wine, and sit in front of the television without really watching it. Sometimes she would look at her daughter with an expression that was hard to read. Frustration, maybe, or sadness, or something worse than both. "Did you finish your homework?" she would ask. "Yes." "Did you actually try this time?" "Yes." "We'll see." They barely talked about anything else. The easy conversations they used to have, back when the girl was very young, had disappeared completely. Now, every exchange felt like a test, and she was always failing. The worst part was that she couldn't explain what was happening inside her head. She didn't have the words for it. All she knew was that reading felt like trying to catch fish with her bare hands. The meaning would slip away just when she thought she had grasped it. Math was even worse. Numbers were supposed to follow rules, but the rules kept changing on her, twisting themselves into puzzles she couldn't solve. She wasn't stupid. Somewhere deep down, she knew that. She could understand complicated movies. She could follow along with stories when someone read them aloud. She could look at a problem and see the solution in her mind, even if she couldn't write it down on paper. But none of that mattered to anyone else. What mattered was grades. What mattered was performance. What mattered was proving your worth through tests and report cards and gold stars that she never received. Her mother had built a successful life through hard work and determination. She had grown up poor, put herself through medical school, and become one of the most respected surgeons in the city. To her, struggle was something you conquered. Failure was something you refused to accept. She couldn't understand why her daughter wouldn't fight harder. Why she seemed to accept defeat so easily. What she didn't see was that her daughter was fighting every single day. She was just fighting a battle that no one else could see. By the time the girl turned 11, her mother had mostly given up. Not officially, not out loud, but in all the ways that mattered. She stopped checking homework. She stopped asking about grades. She stopped pretending that things would get better. The girl noticed. Of course she noticed. And then came the night that changed everything between them. It was a Thursday. Report cards had come out. Another disaster. More red marks. More teacher comments about not meeting potential and needs improvement. Her mother had opened the envelope at the kitchen counter, scanned the contents, and let out a long, slow breath. "Come here," she said. The girl walked over, already bracing herself. "Explain this to me." Her mother held up the report card. "Explain how you can fail almost every subject when I have given you everything. Tutors, books, a quiet room to study in. Everything I never had. I tried," the girl whispered. "I really did try. Then why isn't it working? What is wrong with you?" The question hung in the air between them. What is wrong with you? Not what can we do differently. Not how can I help. Just, what is wrong with you? The girl had no answer. She stood there, small and silent, wishing she could disappear. Her mother shook her head slowly. When she spoke again, her voice was flat, tired, done. "I don't know what to do with you anymore. I've tried everything. Maybe some people just aren't meant to become anything." She walked past her daughter without another word and went upstairs to her bedroom. The door closed with a soft click. The girl stayed in the kitchen for a long time, standing perfectly still. She didn't cry. She had learned that crying didn't help. It just made her feel more pathetic, more broken, more like the failure everyone believed her to be. That night, she made a decision. She would stop hoping for things to change. She would stop waiting for her mother to see her differently. She would accept the truth that everyone else already knew. She was nothing. And nothing was all she would ever be. She was 12 years old. There was an old piano in the living room that nobody ever touched. It had been there for as long as she could remember, pushed into the corner near the window like a piece of furniture that had nowhere else to go. Dust gathered on its dark wooden surface. Old mail piled up on top of it. Family photos in mismatched frames lined its edges, faces smiling out at a room that rarely smiled back. The piano had belonged to her grandmother. That's what her mother had told her once. Years ago, back when they still talked about things that mattered. Her grandmother had played it every day until she got sick. She had died before the girl was born, leaving behind only this instrument and a few faded photographs. Her mother never played it. She said she didn't have time. She said music was a nice hobby but not a real skill. She said a lot of things that made the piano seem unimportant. Just another relic from a past that had no place in their busy, achievement-focused home. So the piano sat there, forgotten, and the girl walked past it every day without giving it a second thought. Until one night, about 3 weeks after her mother had spoken those words in the kitchen, she couldn't sleep. This had become normal for her. She would lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every failure in her mind like a movie she couldn't turn off. The spelling test, the math quiz, the look on her mother's face when she opened report cards, the whispers at school, the tutors who gave up on her. Maybe some people just aren't meant to become anything. The words echoed in her head, over and over, louder every night. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and crept downstairs. The house was dark and quiet. Her mother's bedroom door was closed. Nothing stirred except the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She walked into the living room without knowing why. Maybe she wanted a glass of water. Maybe she just needed to move, to escape the prison of her own thoughts. And then she saw the piano. Moonlight was coming through the window, falling across the keys in a silver stripe. Something about it looked different in that light. Less like forgotten furniture. More like something waiting. She walked over slowly, almost afraid to get too close. She had never really looked at the piano before. Not really. Now she noticed the small scratches on the wood, the yellowed ivory keys, the faded gold lettering above the keyboard that spelled out a name she couldn't quite read in the darkness. Her grandmother had touched these same keys. Her grandmother had sat on this same bench. Her grandmother had made music in this same room, back when the house was different, back when everything was different. She sat down. The bench creaked slightly under her weight. She placed her hands on the keys without pressing them, feeling the cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. Her heart was beating faster now, though she didn't understand why. She pressed one key. A single note rang out into the silence. It was slightly out of tune, a little flat, but to her it sounded like the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. The sound hung in the air for a moment, then faded slowly, like a whisper, disappearing into the dark. She pressed another key, then another. Random notes at first, with no pattern or purpose, just sounds, just vibrations, moving through the quiet house. But something was happening inside her. Something she couldn't explain. For the first time in as long as she could remember, her mind went quiet. The constant noise in her head, the endless loop of criticism and doubt, simply stopped. There was only this. Only the keys beneath her fingers. Only the sounds she was creating. She stayed at the piano until the sky began to lighten outside the window. Then she crept back upstairs and pretended to wake up at her normal time. She didn't tell anyone what she had done. She didn't know how to explain it. And honestly, she was afraid. Afraid that if she talked about it, the magic would break. Afraid that someone would take this one small thing away from her, the way everything good always seemed to get taken away. So, she kept it secret. Every night, after her mother went to bed, she would sneak downstairs and sit at the piano. At first, she just pressed random keys, discovering which sounds she liked and which ones felt wrong. But soon that wasn't enough. She wanted to learn. She wanted to understand. She found old sheet music in the bench, yellowed pages with notes and symbols she didn't recognize. She took pictures of them with her phone and searched online for explanations. She watched videos of people playing, studying their hands, trying to understand how fingers could move that way. It was hard. Really hard. Reading sheet music felt almost as impossible as reading regular words. The symbols jumbled together, refusing to make sense. But here's the thing. When she made mistakes on the piano, nobody yelled at her. Nobody shook their head in disappointment. Nobody asked what was wrong with her. The piano just waited patiently for her to try again. And so she did. Night after night. Week after week. She started with simple things. A basic scale. A beginner's exercise. The opening notes of a song she recognized from somewhere. Her fingers were clumsy at first, hitting wrong keys, stumbling over transitions. But slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, she began to improve. Something strange happened along the way. The piano started to make sense in a way that nothing else ever had. When she looked at sheet music, she didn't see confusing symbols anymore. She saw a map. A story waiting to be told. The notes didn't dance around like letters on a page. They stayed where they were supposed to stay. Music was different. Music was hers. By the time 3 months had passed, she could play real songs. Simple ones, but real. She learned a piece that her grandmother might have played. An old melody that sounded like rain falling on leaves. She learned a modern song she had heard on the radio, picking out the notes by ear when she couldn't find the sheet music. But the thing she loved most was playing without any music at all. Just sitting at the piano and letting her fingers find their own way, making up melodies that came from somewhere deep inside her, places she didn't have words for. When she played like that, she wasn't the girl who failed tests. She wasn't the disappointment. She wasn't the problem that couldn't be fixed. She was just herself. And for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. She started writing things down. Not words, because words still betrayed her, but feelings. The sadness she carried around every day. The loneliness that sat in her chest, like a stone. The tiny sparks of hope that refused to die completely, no matter how hard she tried to smother them. She turned all of it into music. One night, she played something she had been working on for weeks. It started soft and hesitant, like a question nobody would answer. Then it grew stronger, more urgent, filled with all the things she wished she could say out loud. And at the end, it faded to almost nothing. A single note hanging in the darkness, lonely, but somehow beautiful. When she finished, she realized she was crying. Not sad tears. Something else. Something that felt almost like relief. She had found her voice. It just didn't sound like everyone else's. The piano became her best friend, her therapist, her diary. She told it everything through music. Things she could never tell another person. Things she didn't even fully understand, herself. Her mother never knew. She was always at the hospital, always working, always too tired or too distracted to notice that her daughter was changing. The girl was careful to practice only late at night, keeping the volume low, listening for footsteps on the stairs. Part of her wanted to be discovered. Part of her wanted her mother to walk in one night and hear what she could do, to finally see her as something other than a failure. But a bigger part of her was terrified. What if her mother didn't care? What if she dismissed this too, the way she dismissed everything else? What if she said music was a waste of time, that it wouldn't lead anywhere, that it wasn't a real accomplishment? She couldn't bear that. This was too important, so she kept her secret. She went to school and failed her tests, and ate lunch alone and walked through the hallways with her eyes down. She came home and did her homework badly and endured her mother's sighs and silences. But every night, in the darkness, she sat at her grandmother's piano and became someone else entirely. Someone with a story to tell. Someone worth listening to. She just had to find the courage to let the world hear it. 3 years passed like this. 3 years of secret nights at the piano. 3 years of hiding the only thing that made her feel alive. By the time she was 15, she had become a ghost in her own home. She and her mother lived in the same house, ate at the same table, breathed the same air, but they existed in separate worlds that barely touched anymore. Her mother had stopped trying. That was the only way to describe it. She still provided everything a parent was supposed to provide. Food on the table, clothes that fit, a roof overhead, but the emotional connection between them had dried up completely, like a river that had forgotten how to flow. They spoke in short sentences, practical things. Did you eat? I'll be home late. There's leftovers in the fridge. Nothing real. Nothing that mattered. Her mother poured herself into work instead. Longer shifts at the hospital. More surgeries. More patients. It was easier to save strangers than to figure out her own daughter. At least at work, problems had solutions. At least there, her skills meant something. The girl understood. She didn't blame her mother anymore. She had simply accepted that this was how things were. Some mothers and daughters were close. Some weren't. She had drawn the unlucky card, and there was nothing to do but play the hand she'd been dealt. School remained difficult. Her grades stayed low. Teachers wrote the same comments on her report cards, year after year. Not working to potential. Needs to apply herself. Could do better, with more effort. They meant well, probably. But they didn't understand. Nobody understood. She had learned to survive by becoming invisible. She sat in the back of classrooms. She didn't raise her hand. She didn't join clubs, or teams, or groups. She moved through the hallways like a shadow. Noticed by no one. Remembered by fewer. But there was one person who saw her differently. Her music teacher. He was an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, and a way of looking at people that made them feel like they actually existed. He had been teaching at the school for over 20 years, and he had seen every kind of student pass through his classroom. The talented ones. The struggling ones. The ones who loved music. The ones who were just there because they needed the credit. She had ended up in his class by accident. She needed an elective, and music appreciation was the only one that fit her schedule. She figured it would be easy. Listen to some songs, write some simple responses, get a passing grade without too much pain. She didn't expect it to matter, but the teacher noticed something about her from the very first week. While other students fidgeted or whispered or stared at their phones, she sat perfectly still when music played. Her eyes would close slightly. Her breathing would slow. She listened in a way that most people never learned to listen. He started paying attention to her after that. Not in an obvious way. Just small things. A nod when she walked in. A question about what she thought of a particular piece. He never pushed. He never made her uncomfortable. He just let her know, quietly, that he saw her. One afternoon, she stayed late to finish an assignment she had been struggling with. The school was mostly empty. Most students had gone home. She was sitting in the music room, trying to make sense of words that kept rearranging themselves on the page, and then she heard it. A piano. Somewhere down the hall. She followed the sound without thinking. It led her to a small practice room she had never noticed before. The door was open. Inside was an old, upright piano, similar to the one at home. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at it. Her fingers itched. Her heart beat faster. She looked up and down the hallway. No one was around. Before she could talk herself out of it, she walked in and sat down. She started playing. Not a song she had learned from sheet music. Something of her own. Something she had been working on at home for months. A piece that told the story of a girl who felt invisible. It started quiet, almost afraid, then grew stronger as it went along. There were moments of anger in it, moments of sadness, and underneath it all, a desperate kind of hope that refused to die. She got so lost in the music that she didn't hear the footsteps behind her. When she finished and turned around, her music teacher was standing in the doorway. Her heart stopped. She jumped up from the bench, her face burning with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to. The door was open and I'm sorry. I'll go." But the teacher didn't look angry. He looked stunned. He stood there for a moment without speaking. And when he finally found his voice, it was barely above a whisper. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She didn't know how to answer. "I taught myself," she finally said. "At home. On my grandmother's old piano. That piece you were playing. What was it?" "I don't know." He stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Like she had suddenly transformed into someone completely different. "You made that up," he repeated slowly. "You composed that yourself." She nodded, terrified of what would happen next. Would he tell her she wasn't supposed to be in here? Would he mention it to her other teachers? Would word somehow get back to her mother? Instead, he pulled up a chair and sat down across from her. "How long have you been playing?" he asked. "About 3 years." 3 years? "And you've never had lessons?" "One. No. No one knows you can do this?" She shook her head. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle but serious. "What you just played," he said. "That wasn't just music. That was something special. The way you expressed emotion through those notes. The way you built the piece from beginning to end. Most trained musicians can't do what you just did." She didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked at her with that kind of respect. "There's a talent show coming up," he continued. "End of the semester. Students perform in front of the whole school. I think you should enter." The words hit her like cold water. "No," she said immediately. "Why not?" "Because..." She struggled to find the right words. "Because everyone would be watching. Because I'm not. I'm not the kind of person who does things like that." "What kind of person are you?" The question caught her off guard. She thought about all the labels that had been stuck to her over the years. Slow. Difficult. Disappointing. Failure. "I'm nobody," she said quietly. "I'm the girl who can't do anything right." The teacher leaned forward slightly. "That's what they told you. But that's not what I just heard. What I heard was someone with a gift. Someone with a story to tell. Someone who has been hiding in the shadows for too long." She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back hard. "The world needs to hear your story," he said. "Not because it will make you famous. Not because it will fix everything. But because your story matters. And there might be someone in that audience who needs to hear exactly what you have to say." She went home that night and sat at her grandmother's piano for hours. She thought about what the teacher had said. She thought about the talent show. She thought about standing on a stage in front of everyone who had ever overlooked her, everyone who had ever whispered about her, everyone who had ever made her feel small. The idea terrified her, but somewhere underneath the fear, there was something else. A tiny spark. A whisper of possibility. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Over the next few weeks, she met with her teacher after school. They talked about the talent show, about what she might play, about how to prepare. He never pressured her. He just encouraged her, believed in her, treated her like someone worth investing in. Finally, after many sleepless nights, she made her decision. She would do it. She would perform. But she wouldn't tell her mother. She couldn't risk it. If her mother found out and dismissed it, or worse, didn't bother to show up, it would destroy her. Better to do this alone. Better to expect nothing. The night of the talent show was set for a Friday in December. She had no idea that it would change everything. The night of the talent show arrived cold and clear. December air bit at her cheeks as she walked through the school parking lot, her hands shaking inside her coat pockets. She had told her mother she was staying late for a study group. An easy lie. Her mother barely looked up from her laptop when she said it, just nodded and said she would be working late anyway, probably wouldn't be home until after 9. Perfect. By then, it would all be over. Her mother would never know. The auditorium was already filling up when she slipped through the side door. Students and parents crowded the rows of seats, talking and laughing, waving to friends. The noise felt overwhelming. She pressed herself against the wall and tried to breathe. What was she doing here? What had she been thinking? These people didn't know her. They didn't care about her. To them, she was just the quiet girl who sat in the back of class and never spoke. If she walked out right now, no one would even notice. But then she saw her music teacher standing near the stage. He caught her eye and smiled. A small nod. "You can do this." She made her way backstage, where the other performers were gathered. A boy was practicing guitar chords in the corner. A group of girls, stretched in preparation for a dance routine. Someone was doing vocal warm-ups, scales rising and falling in the cramped space. Everyone seemed so confident, so sure of themselves. She felt like a fraud standing among them. The show began. One by one, acts took the stage. Some were good, some were average. A few got big applause. The audience laughed at jokes, clapped along to upbeat songs, cheered for their friends and children. She watched from the wings, her stomach tight with nerves. Her slot was near the end. Each act that finished brought her closer to the moment she dreaded most. And then, something unexpected happened. Her mother's phone had died at the hospital. A small thing. Annoying, but not unusual. She borrowed a charger from a colleague and plugged it in while finishing her paperwork. When the screen lit up again, she saw a notification she had missed. A reminder from the school. Talent show tonight, 7 p.m. All families welcome. She almost ignored it. Talent show? Her daughter wasn't in any talent show. Her daughter wasn't in anything. She was probably at that study group she had mentioned, struggling through homework like always. But something made her pause. A strange feeling she couldn't name. When was the last time she had gone to anything at her daughter's school? When was the last time she had shown up for something that wasn't a mandatory parent-teacher conference? She looked at the clock. It was already past 7:30. If she left now, she might catch the end. She almost talked herself out of it. There was still work to do. She was tired. It was cold outside. 100 small excuses lined up in her mind, ready to be used. But that strange feeling wouldn't go away. 20 minutes later, she pulled into the school parking lot. The auditorium was dark when she slipped through the back door. Some kind of comedy act was on stage. A boy telling jokes that made the audience laugh. She found an empty spot along the back wall and stood there, scanning the crowd for her daughter. She didn't see her anywhere. Maybe she wasn't here after all. Maybe the study group story was true. Maybe this had been a waste of time. She was about to leave when the comedy act finished, and the lights shifted. A single spotlight appeared on the stage, illuminating a piano she hadn't noticed before. And then her daughter walked out. She felt her breath catch in her throat. Her daughter. Her quiet, struggling, invisible daughter, walking onto a stage in front of hundreds of people. The girl sat down at the piano. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't speak. She just placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes for a moment. And then she began to play. The first notes were soft, hesitant, like a child asking a question they're afraid to have answered. The melody was simple at first, almost fragile, as if it might break apart at any moment. But then it began to grow. The music swelled, filling the auditorium with something that felt alive. There were no words, but somehow, the piano was speaking. It was telling a story that everyone in that room could feel, even if they couldn't quite put it into language. There was loneliness in those notes. Deep, aching loneliness. The kind that sits in your chest for so long you forget it's not supposed to be there. There was confusion. The feeling of trying so hard and always falling short. Of watching everyone else succeed at things that should be simple. Of wondering what was wrong with you. Why you couldn't be normal. Why you couldn't be enough. There was anger too. Buried underneath everything else. Anger at a world that measured worth in grades and achievements. Anger at the people who gave up too easily. Anger at herself for believing what they said about her. But woven through all of it was something else. Something that surprised everyone who heard it. Hope. Small and stubborn and refusing to die. A hope that said maybe, just maybe, There was more to life than what she had been told. Maybe she wasn't broken. Maybe she just spoke a different language. And maybe, someday, someone would finally understand. The music built to a climax that made people hold their breath. Notes crashed and tumbled over each other like waves against rocks. It was almost too much to bear. And then, slowly, everything grew quiet again. The final passage was the most beautiful of all. Gentle, tender. Like a hand reaching out in the darkness, searching for another hand to hold. Like forgiveness being offered to someone who hadn't asked for it yet. The last note hung in the air for what felt like forever. Then, silence. Her mother couldn't move. She stood frozen against the back wall, tears streaming down her face. Her hand pressed against her mouth. For the first time in years, she had truly heard her daughter. Not her test scores. Not her report cards. Not the labels and diagnoses and failures that had piled up over time. Her, the real her. The person she was underneath all of that. And what she heard broke her heart into 1,000 pieces. All that pain. All that loneliness. All those years of feeling invisible and worthless and unloved. It had all been there, right in front of her. And she had been too blind to see it. She had been so focused on what her daughter couldn't do that she had completely missed what she could do. She had been so disappointed by the child, she expected that she had failed to see the child she actually had. The applause started slowly. One person. Then another. Then the whole auditorium rose to their feet. A standing ovation. The girl looked up, startled, as if she had forgotten anyone else was there. Her eyes were wet. Her hands were trembling. She had just poured out her entire soul. And now hundreds of strangers were applauding. But she wasn't looking for strangers. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and somehow, through all those people, she found her mother, standing in the back, crying. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Everything else disappeared. The applause, the lights, the other performers waiting in the wings. None of it mattered. For one long moment, mother and daughter just looked at each other. And in that look, something shifted. Something that had been broken for a very long time began, finally, to heal. The girl stood up from the piano on shaky legs. She gave a small bow to the audience. Not because she knew what else to do, but because it seemed like the right thing. Then she walked off the stage. Her mother was already moving toward her, pushing through the crowd, not caring about the people she bumped into or the strange looks they gave her. She had wasted so much time. She wasn't going to waste another second. They found each other in the hallway behind the auditorium. The noise from inside was muffled now. People were still clapping, still talking, still waiting for the next act. But out here, in this narrow corridor, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, it was just the two of them, mother and daughter, standing 3 feet apart, neither one knowing what to say. Her mother spoke first. Her voice cracked on the very first word. I didn't know. The girl stood perfectly still. Her arms wrapped around herself like armor. She had imagined this moment so many times. What she would say if her mother ever found out. How she would defend herself, explain herself, protect herself from the disappointment that always came. But looking at her mother now, she didn't see disappointment. She saw tears. I didn't know, her mother said again, shaking her head slowly. All this time, you were carrying all of that inside you, and I didn't know. You weren't supposed to be here, the girl whispered. I know. But something told me to come. I don't know what. I just felt like I needed to be here tonight. Her mother's voice broke completely. And now I understand why. She stepped forward and pulled her daughter into her arms. The girl stiffened at first. She couldn't remember the last time her mother had hugged her. Really hugged her. Not a quick pat on the shoulder or a distant one-armed squeeze. A real embrace, the kind that says, I'm here and I'm not letting go. But slowly, she let herself soften. She let her arms unfold. She let her head rest against her mother's shoulder. And then she cried. Not quiet tears, Not the kind she had learned to hide over the years. These were loud, messy, shaking sobs that came from somewhere so deep she didn't know that place existed. Years of pain poured out of her in that hallway. Years of feeling invisible. Years of believing she was worthless. Her mother held her through all of it. She didn't say anything. She didn't try to fix it or explain it away. She just held on and let her daughter fall apart. When the tears finally slowed, they sat down together on a bench against the wall. The talent show continued inside, but neither of them cared. They had their own show to get through now, their own performance that was long overdue. "I'm so sorry," her mother said quietly. "I failed you. I was supposed to protect you, to support you, to help you find your way. And instead, I made everything worse." The girl wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "You were disappointed in me." "I understood." "No." Her mother shook her head firmly. "I was disappointed in myself. I just didn't know how to admit it. When you struggled in school, I didn't know how to help. I had never struggled like that. Everything came easy to me. So, when things didn't come easy to you, I thought it meant you weren't trying. I thought if I just pushed harder, you would figure it out." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. And instead of seeing you, really seeing you, I just kept measuring you against something you were never supposed to be." The girl listened without speaking. These were words she had waited her whole life to hear. "That music you played tonight," her mother continued, "it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. And the saddest. Because I realized that you've been trying to tell me how you felt for years. And I never listened. I never gave you a chance. I was scared to show you," the girl admitted. "I thought you would say it was a waste of time, that it wasn't a real skill, that it wouldn't lead anywhere." Her mother closed her eyes. "I probably would have. A year ago, 6 months ago, I probably would have said exactly that. Because I was so focused on the wrong things. I thought success meant grades and degrees and job titles. I thought that was the only path to a good life." She opened her eyes and looked at her daughter. "But tonight, watching you on that stage, I finally understood something. You have a gift that can't be measured by any test. You can make people feel things. You can tell stories without words. You can reach into someone's heart and touch something real." She took her daughter's hand. "That's not a waste of time. That's a miracle." They sat together for a long time after that, talking in a way they hadn't talked in years. Maybe ever. The girl told her mother about the nights at the piano, about teaching herself to play, about finding sheet music in the bench and watching videos to learn technique. She told her about her music teacher and how he had encouraged her to perform. Her mother listened to every word. She asked questions. She wanted to understand. It was the beginning of something new. The road forward wasn't easy. They both knew that. Years of distance couldn't be erased by one conversation, no matter how honest. There were old wounds that needed time to heal, trust that had to be rebuilt slowly, carefully, one day at a time. But they were finally trying. Both of them. Together. Her mother started coming home earlier from work. Not every night, but more often than before. She would sit in the living room while her daughter played piano, just listening. Sometimes she would close her eyes and let the music wash over her. Sometimes tears would slide down her cheeks. She never asked her to stop. She never said it was too loud or that she should be studying instead. She just listened. They started having dinner together. Real dinners. With real conversations. Her mother asked about school, but not just about grades anymore. She asked about friends, about interests, about dreams. She asked what her daughter wanted from life. The girl started seeing a specialist who finally gave her struggles a name. Dyslexia. Not stupidity. Not laziness. Just a brain that processed words differently than most people. With the right support and accommodations, school became less of a nightmare. Her grades improved. Not dramatically, but enough. But music remained her true language. The place where she felt most herself. 2 years later, She applied to a music conservatory. She performed her audition piece, an expanded version of what she had played at the talent show. She had been working on it ever since that night, adding layers and depth, letting it grow as she grew. She got in. Full scholarship. The day the acceptance letter arrived, her mother cried again. But this time, they were different tears. Pride. Joy. The overwhelming relief of watching your child find their place in the world. Before she left for college, her mother gave her a gift. The old piano. Fully restored. It had been taken away for weeks, secretly repaired and tuned, brought back to life just like their relationship. Inside the bench was a handwritten note. This piano gave me back my daughter. It taught me that success isn't measured in grades or degrees. It's measured in the courage to keep playing, even when no one is listening. I'm listening now. I always will be. Today, that girl is a composer and music therapist. She works with children who struggle the way she once struggled. Kids who feel invisible. Kids who have been told they'll never amount to anything. Kids who are bursting with things to say but can't find the words. She teaches them what she learned in her darkest moments. That everyone has a voice, even if it doesn't sound like everyone else's. That your worth isn't determined by tests or grades or other people's expectations. That sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones you feel rather than hear. In her studio, there sits an old upright piano. Still slightly out of tune after all these years. Still beautiful. She plays it every day. And somewhere, she knows her grandmother is listening too.